Let's finish off with a reaction to Simon Jordan and Martin Keown as they clash over division between Newcastle's Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell. We're gonna, watch it. It's a long video, but we shall, see how it goes.
Start to a Premier League campaign in 29 years. They're on the brink of something.
Do you know, I watched the game yesterday afternoon, and I was thinking they were controlling matters, but it didn't feel that they had the best players on the pitch. And then at halftime, he makes Harvey Barnes comes on, Tonali comes on, Willett comes on, and they just had that the handbrake came off, and they played with really attacking some of the goals in the game. Harvey Barnes' goal was ridiculous, wonderful goal, and you saw them on the bench. You saw Harvey Barnes on the bench, almost saying, "Do you know what? I can do better than this." In fact, they were in dialogue. And they went on and did it. They did the talking on the pitch, and I like that. Now, you can say, well, is the manager really sure of his best 11? You can say opposite to that, well, great competition. He made the necessary changes. But I think there's a...
Or is Barnes one of those players, you would know better than I, that isn't a starting lineup player?
Well, Gordon plays on the left, and they both like that position. Obviously, they like cutting in. But it's like trying to find them a place for both of them in the team. In the second half, Isak went off with a nosebleed. So they've had to put Gordon down the middle, and he kind of floated out of the game a little bit, but he was a shining light in the first half. I think his decision making, his composure on the ball, he's growing as an individual.
Isn't this the beauty of having the ability to have a decent bench and then knowing how to manage it?
Fantastic bench.
So rather than saying that Barnes should have started, ultimately they won a game. How you win a game over 90 minutes is irrelevant. If you use your bench and you've got that kind of resource on there and you believe that Gordon's the right way to go from the start, and most people would argue that Gordon is the right thing to go with, then ultimately the outcome is the outcome.
Well,
and as much as we're trying, as much as the media are trying to create as much division between Newcastle's management, whether it be Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell, as they possibly can, the team on the field is winning games.
It's the manager's prerogative to pick the team he wants.
Correct.
I'm just thinking it seemed obvious to me, but that they needed to be on the pitch. Now, he didn't mess about. He didn't take his time on it. He made the necessary changes.
But that was an enforced change, wasn't it? It was an enforced change.
One of them was
Isak,
enforced.
The change that we're talking about.
No, but there were 3 changes at half-time. All 3 of those players came on at half-time, and they played a major part in what happened.
Well, this is it, man. I mean, football's woken up to this. Eddie Jones, in the world of rugby, used to say the finishers who I bring on are as important as the starters.
Yeah, but he was a riddle wrapped up in a rhyme, though, wasn't he, Eddie Jones?
Yeah. You mentioned the media at the heart of this so-called argument going on behind the scenes at Newcastle. It's not really the media. We're kind of stepping back and watching them do it. Sporting director Paul Mitchell, once of Southampton, then Monaco, he's in the door at Newcastle. And he came in and was fairly swift to criticise the previous transfer strategy from the past. He said, was it fit for purpose? Not the last winter one. The winter before that. Eddie Howe thought that the time was right pre-match to talk about Mitchell's comments.
I think a few things on that. I think very, very proud of every single player that we signed in that period. I think it's very easy to look back at any transfer window and sort of make a judgment on the players that you've signed 3 years down the line, but you have to go back to actually the situation we're in when we're in those moments where you're in the relegation zone and you're trying to recruit players. That's not an easy thing to do. So I think it's about actually when you're in that moment, the decisions that you made, and I think everyone can hold their heads up very high.
Just lastly, have you spoken to Paul since last week?
No, I've had no contact from Paul, but I don't think that's unusual. We've got different jobs to do. I'm focusing on the football and the team, and he's obviously focusing on his role.
So they're both focusing on their separate roles, and we know that they don't appear to have that much of a close relationship either.
I think there's a deliberate misinterpretation from the media on characterising what Paul Mitchell said. Under the governance of football, in order for Newcastle to be able to refresh and re-energise their team, they need to have a transfer policy that enables them to move players in and out to be able to do what they need to do, which is give Newcastle the opportunity to progress. That's the point he's making. And what's being suggested is that he's criticising Eddie Howe, not doing that at all. He's saying what's not fit for purpose is in order for Newcastle to progress the way that people perceive they would with a buying policy, they had to buy players and sell players
why
better.
Doesn't then Eddie Howe react in that manner? Why does he then respond as if he is being criticised?
Because he's pushing back against the characterisation that the media are framing it in, which is basically Paul Mitchell is criticising him.
Why are they airing their dirty washing in public? These conversations should be taking place internally.
Well, he can't with the media, because ultimately, if you're asked a question,
you can ignore the question.
No, hold on. Well, of course you can.
I think
then-
he'd be
and then-
best placed to have done
And then
that.
you can be critical of the reasons why the club isn't communicative. So if Newcastle, the challenge for Newcastle is that everyone thinks they're the world's richest football club, and why aren't they buying their way to success? And the reality of it is they can't. So now what you've got is a new director of football coming in and saying, in part, the reasons why I can't do what I would like to do is because the previous buying policies, which were right at the time for what we needed to fix at the time, aren't proving to be right in the here and now because we can't trade the way we want to now. Now, that's not a criticism. Now, what Eddie's doing is going, OK, I'm not going to have these players criticised because he's taking it down to a micro level and thinking that the players in the dressing room you've still got to manage are being in part criticised. No, they're not. And that's the way the question's been put.
But Eddie said, you know, at the end of the last window there, it was the most hands-off window I've ever had.
Yeah.
And Mitchell says, we didn't have the sales window we thought we would have.
Yeah, because they wanted Gary.
And we have to look at that strategy as well.
And they couldn't get it because I would imagine that the question was loaded about why didn't they buy the players they thought they were going to buy. And given the fact that we know that the one player they wanted was Gary and they couldn't get him. Now, maybe in the context of a question, he can be more diplomatic about suggesting the fact that there might be blame to be attributed. If you've got one, if you're a sniper, you better hit that one shot you've got. And if the one shot you want is Gary and you miss it, you're going to be judged by those standards.
But this is about control, isn't it? So this is about Eddie now. This is a new guy coming in, and this is someone's. If he's setting unrealistic targets, which really he was, 75 million is an unrealistic. I saw him getting done at the weekend, by the way, quite cheaply
that's a
for
different
pace,
conversation,
and
isn't
he
it?
really good enough.
That's
So
a
it's
different
kind of
question.
like, okay, if we're in the building, we've got to have as a football club, we can't have one target. We've got to have 3 or 4. Eddie.
That's my point.
Do you know?
That's my point.
And Eddie just wants one target.
This
He's
isn't
basically
media
saying,
meddling, though. It's not media meddling. I mean,
It's media mischaracterisation is what it is.
Mitchell was quoted as saying there were other targets. Could there have been more? I would say potentially.
Yeah.
But Eddie was very clear that he had to feel comfortable that the person added value because we have really good players. That's why we ended up where we did.
And that's a statement of fact. That's a statement of process.
So Mitchell's basically saying, point your guns at Eddie and not me.
Mitchell's not saying point your guns at anyone.
No, he's
giving
you in the building,
He's giving you an answer to the question.
he needs to take time for us to trust him.
What we're doing is characterising the question as attributing blame. Paul Bugger can't answer a question. He gives you an answer to a question, and then we characterise it as some sort of division between people.
Yeah, but don't you see that Eddie's always so old school in terms of like the way he manages clubs? People tell me at Bournemouth he did everything, lock, stock and barrel.
Hang on.
He wants to do the same at Newcastle. And by the way, he hasn't done a bad job, has he?
No, not
in
at all.
doing that.
Agreed.
Look where he is in the table
The last
right
thing
now.
I would categorise Eddie Howe as old school. Right? I wouldn't categorise him as old school
No, in
at all.
terms of being given carte blanche to do what he wants within a football
Second of
club.
all, I very much doubt, given the fact that Bournemouth spent 2 and 6, that he had many decisions to make. Right, so his ultimate experience of how much money they could spend is superseded by the fact they had no money to spend.
But don't you
and
find
when they
it
bought
strange,
players like
though,
Jordan Eve, they were bad buys at times.
Before they played at the weekend against Wolves, don't you find it strange that Eddie came out with what he came out with regarding the transfer strategy, having not had a conversation with Mitchell?
Don't you think it's strange that the poor sod that's going to manage a football team on Saturday afternoon, the first question he has to answer is something that's been said by the sporting director? Maybe if the question wasn't asked, then Eddie Howe wouldn't be given the answer.
But the question was asked, and he hadn't spoken with Mitchell. But don't you find it strange that the two hadn't spoken?
Why is the sporting director
Not since
speaking?
the transfer window slammed shut.
But they're not aligned, are they? They're not aligned when their clubs speak.
Depends if you believe that the definition of the role, there would be zero benefit. Surely there would be zero. Think about the logic of it just for a second. What is the benefit or lack of benefit in a sporting director not speaking to a manager? Unless there was a real confrontation.
But they're speaking through the press, though, aren't they?
Well, are they? Or are
They are.
Well,
So
the local press.
You own Newcastle Football Club now.
Yes.
What would you be doing today? You'd be saying, "Come on, guys, I don't want this being aired publicly. Have
But
your
I would-
conversations
but
internally."
You're asking me again.
Eddie, come on, adjust now. We've got somebody else.
Well, you're
in.
seeing my response.
You're looking at Brighton
But
Football
you're-
Club,
but
and you're
seeing-
saying they're one of the best
but
run in
you're
the country.
seeing my response.
The manager doesn't decide who comes through the
But
door.
you're seeing my response. You just asked me a question. My response has already superseded that. Because if I was the owner of Newcastle, my response would be the same response I've just given you, which is, this is you, media, characterising two individuals inside a business.
The
as having
media are going to
division.
be the media.
And I'd
We have
also-
to handle it better
but also,
internally.
Martin, I'd be privy to what was the relationship between my two colleagues, so I wouldn't need
Come
to
on,
have the
Simon,
conversation.
don't sound very aligned to me when Eddie's saying that before the Wolves game.
No, because the question is being asked of him in such a way. And what he's doing is defending the particular area that he thinks is of concern and doesn't want any further division. Because
Yeah, but if he'd spoken to Paul Mitchell before that interview, before the Wolves game, he'd have said, no. I know what Paul said, and he didn't mean it like that. Just so as you know, Paul and I have spoken about this. We're on the same page.
Well, maybe, and maybe
Now, let me talk to you about my team
and
for
maybe
Wolves.
that's right, and maybe there would have been benefits in the fact that those two guys might have communicated, and maybe they did, and maybe they didn't want to share that information with us in the media.
Thank God for that.
No, but there is a process that you work towards, and the whole process isn't about what
But this
satisfies
Paul Mitchell comes in off the street. He's a
in.
Hold
not
on,
off.
hold on.
In,
If
not
he's
off.
just come in, he's like a blow-in. He's come in and telling everybody what he's going to do. No,
didn't
we
say
fought.
that.
We fought to take this club out of
didn't say
relegation
that.
up to the top 4.
He didn't say that.
And you talk like that.
He didn't say that.
That's how
don't
it's
mischaracterise
his reaction.
what the
That's
media
how-
said.
that's how
no,
you
no,
chose
but
to
that's
interpret it.
that's how Eddie's taken to interpret
No,
it.
that's how he's choosing to interpret
No,
it.
Eddie is
via the
taking it
media
that way.
If your transfer policy
He stood
stops
up for those players.
If your
I
transfer
justify
policy,
every signing I've made.
but that's a different argument. And that's
That's
not a
the
problem.
argument he's making.
No, the argument is about transfer policies and who's more effective in it. And the reasons why Newcastle can't buy is because their previous transfer policies have led them to a position where they can't buy now.
Overspend.
Okay.
Oh wow, we ended up. I thought it was going to be a quick video. We ended up watching the whole thing, which is great. What a debate! What a clash! But I do agree with a lot of the things that both Martin and Simon are saying. Though it's been poked by the media and more fire and fire and fire, but the protagonists haven't put water on the fire either. So. And it could be, again, interpreted as Paul Mitchell is saying one thing. He's coming out after what Eddie's been saying about the window, contradicting Eddie because he feels like Eddie was saying, "Well, I haven't been involved." And then the next conference, Eddie says, "I haven't talked to Mitchell, since many weeks ago." One saying that he keeps Eddie, informed of everything and talk to him more than his wife, and the other one says I haven't talked to him at all. So it's it's interesting. What do you think about this?
Again, mate, what's everybody saying in the chat is exactly right. There's very few. I do enjoy listening to Simon Jordan talk. He often gives some critical information across certain platforms, and like I say, you either agree with it or you disagree with it. And with this one, I wholeheartedly agree with him. And I said that at the start when we looked at the argument from the outset. I said, to me, it's an interpretation issue. It's not the fact that he's saying that what Eddie's done is wrong. They were in a situation where they needed to go buy. They needed to buy better players. And at this present moment in time, we can't continue to do it. And Simon Jordan's virtually reiterated what we were saying 2 weeks ago. And it's nice to hear it from these guys. Because, like I say, I do think they need to put a little bit of a blanket over this now. We all saw the pictures in the stands of the three of them, Eels, Mitchell and Pete Silverstone. And none of them looked happy to be even sitting next to each other, never mind. And again, that just fuels the fire. Because none of them were what we saw when Amanda was at the games, where she was jovial, where she was, encouraging the lads to play better. She was doing a lot of things to when she was watching the matches, which we actually don't see from these three. They're very much like statues. And like I say, all that does to me is give the media the fuel to go and say and point the finger and say there's definitely something going on behind the scenes. Now, the other point of what he was saying is, yes, Eddie could at any point say that we've spoken, it's all put to bed, we're really good, if that's facts. But it seems to me as if Eddie's concentrating on the coaching side of things, and at some point Mitchell and Eddie will have to come together and discuss January. It's around the corner now. And we've got very few months left before the negotiation starts. So let's watch the space.
Well, he did say Eddie Howe over the weekend on when you guys would get ready for a window. He says, well, I would expect anytime soon now because you have to get ready and get your potential targets, etc. So good stuff there.